Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recording and recordings. In this case, actually, we're talking about Tchaikovsky Symphonies 4, 5, and 6, the big ones. Not that 1, 2, and 3 aren't marvelous, they are. But for generations, 4, 5, and 6 were the ones that everybody played, and 1, 2, and 3 were the ones that everybody ignored most of the time. So 4, 5, and 6 tended to get recorded together in clumps. Well, I mean, they were recorded over time, but they would be released in a little box. And now they're on little CD thingies gathered together in various ways. And they're still the most popular ones and arguably the greatest. I mean, there are other people who might say Tchaikovsky's first couple of symphonies have some of his best symphonic music. I think actually that they're wonderful, beautiful works. But 4, 5, and 6 is what history has decided. The universe has told us that they come in a clump. So we're dealing with symphonies 4, 5, and 6. But in order to do the reference recording, we have to do a little bit of discographic history, which is the part that I love, absolutely adore. Because remember, the reference recordings aren't necessarily the best recordings. They're simply the most popular, the most representative, the ones that most people regarded as the recordings to which others should be compared because of their excellence. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, they're excellent recordings, but maybe not the ultimate whatever. And this is particularly true of Tchaikovsky's 4, 5, and 6 because all Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6s must be compared to, wait a minute, here we go. I have to spin around and find it. These, Yevgeny Mravinsky with the Leningrad Symphony Orchestra. I mean, these are astonishing performances. Everybody knows it. Some people think they're the best. Some people think they're the essentials, the ones you have to have, but they are not reference recordings. And there's a good reason for that. The reason that they are not the reference recordings, I'm talking backwards here, I hope you can hear me. The reason that they are not reference recordings is because, first of all, Mravinsky was not a known quantity in the West for most of his career. His recordings were not distributed and marketed with any sort of enthusiasm, and there weren't many of them. He did not like to make recordings. Those Tchaikovsky symphonies were a rarity. There was a mono set, too, that had a fifth, I think, the fourth was Sanderling. He did a couple of them in mono, but then he did those in stereo. And that was a rare thing. So they were regarded as special. And also his interpretations were somewhat, well, let's just say, unlike anything else. They were blisteringly fast, unbelievably thrilling, with string playing that you have to hear to believe. And the tonal qualities of that orchestra were like no other. They are unique, extraordinarily too unique in a sense to become the reference recordings. And they just didn't have the general distribution when everybody was playing Tchaikovsky. Everybody. And there were plenty of Russian artists or Russian style artists in the West who were doing Russian music very well. So there's Mravinsky. But, it's a special set, even if it's not the reference recording. You may think it's better than any of the reference recordings, and I wouldn't disagree with you necessarily. But that's just the way of the world. Marketing does play a factor. And let's face it, the Soviet Union was not one for marketing, ever. The only thing they marketed was Marxism or communism or whatever it was. So never mind. We love Mravinsky, but he ain't the reference. No. There are 2 reference recordings for this clump of symphonies, even though there were a bazillion performances of all of them. And one of the reasons that you make a clump out of a reference recording out of a clump is because it's almost impossible to come up with reference recordings for the individual works. I mean, what is your reference recording for Tchaikovsky's Fifth? There are a couple of dozen superb performances of Tchaikovsky's Fifth, and no one necessarily rose to the top. But as a clump, we're able to make some different surmises. So the dual references for Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6 are Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra and Herbert von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic. And like I said, for very different reasons. Now, the differences. Well, here are the differences. The difference is that Karajan's Tchaikovsky was very, very good. I mean, he was a major Tchaikovsky guy from the very, very start. He recorded these like a zillion times. I think he did more Tchaikovsky than he did Beethoven, quite frankly. Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6 anyway. He started on EMI, Of course, where he had the Philharmonia and then the early Berlin Philharmonic and the Vienna Philharmonic, and then he did them in Berlin a couple of times. Then he did them in Vienna. Then he did them digitally. There's for Tchaikovsky I don't know how many are there, 5 or 6 recordings. It's really astonishing how frequently he did it. And so Karajan became the reference number one by weight of numbers. I mean, he just flooded the market with his Tchaikovsky recordings. There were so many of them. Number two, of these works specifically. Number two, he was we wanted to be the big German conductor who was really better at music that wasn't German. We all know that. He was really good in Russian music. He should have done so much more. I mean, especially because that string section is just amazing in Tchaikovsky. And so we have his Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6. But the problem with his 4, 5, and 6 is, even on Deutsche Grammophon, which versions do you pick? Especially the fifth, because his first version of the fifth was quite good, but his second version was even better from the 1970s. The third that he did with Vienna later in his career was not so hot and not as great, but he was a remarkable Tchaikovsky conductor. And so his Tchaikovsky performances are absolutely reference worthy. Beautiful, beautiful performances throughout his whole career. They were wonderful performances. However, Ormandy, on the other hand, never had a pretense of being the great German conductor who deigned to play Russian music, as did Karajan. No, Ormandy was a Tchaikovsky specialist. This was his thing. He sold more recordings of Tchaikovsky than any other artist in history, probably. I mean, that's what the statistics supposedly reveal. These were your go-to Tchaikovsky symphony performances, and they're very different from the way Tchaikovsky is often played today. Today people emphasize the savagery and the rawness and the hysteria. Ormandy wasn't that kind of conductor. Ormandy's Tchaikovsky was elegant. It wasn't unemotional by any stretch of the imagination, but it was gorgeously played. It was warm. It was humane. It was full of love with equally beautiful strings as you compare it to Karajan, but with stately tempos. Actually, Karajan was somewhat that way too. Steady tempos. No lack of excitement, of course. There really wasn't. But my oh my, he was the Tchaikovsky guy, the go-to guy in the 50s and 60s. When he switched to RCA, this is his Columbia series of Tchaikovsky Symphonies 4, 5, and 6, he waited until the end of his career, really close to the end of his career, to do Symphonies 1, 2, and 3, as did Karajan, who finally got around to them after doing 4, 5, and 6 a few dozen times each. Ormandy only did one other Tchaikovsky cycle in stereo after these Columbia ones for RCA. And so his Tchaikovsky output was a little bit less fecund, is that the word? A little bit less excessive. And he also gave us an opportunity to really let his earlier recordings sink in and become the reference, become the go-to recordings. And there were plenty of people in Europe who loved Ormandy's Tchaikovsky, and plenty of people here in the USA who loved Karajan's Tchaikovsky. That's why you cannot really choose between them. They were equally present in the marketplace and equally highly regarded, very highly regarded. So for Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6, those are your choices. Ormandy and Karajan, but you've got to pick the right Karajans. It just can't be any Karajans, which makes things too tiresome for me. I mean, I just, back when he was alive, it was a little easier. They could delete things and whatnot, but now it's all flying around out there somewhere, and you don't know which one to get. But Ormandy on Sony is a really, really good bet to give you a beautiful sense of all the richness and warmth that is Tchaikovsky in his most ripe and romantic vein. However, like I said, if Karajan's your man, go for it. It works either way. It really does. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.